Be delusional, the mindset behind every extraordinary life. Published by Profound Audiobook. Introduction. Extraordinary lives are built on beliefs that others would call unrealistic, irrational, even delusional, and that is precisely why they work. Every breakthrough, every impossible achievement, every story that bends reality begins the same way. Someone chooses to believe in something before there is any evidence to support it. Not because it makes sense, but because they refuse to live within the limits of what currently exists. What the world calls delusion is often nothing more than a vision that has not yet been proven. The problem is not that people dream too big. The problem is that they stop themselves too early. They shrink their desires to fit their current situation. They wait for permission, for proof, for the right time, and in doing so, they unknowingly trade a life of possibility for a life of predictability. But those who create extraordinary lives play by a different set of rules. They decide first, and then they build. They believe first, and then they become. In this audiobook, we will challenge everything you've been taught about being realistic. You will learn why accepting reality as it is can quietly limit your future, and how choosing a bold, almost unreasonable vision can expand it. You will discover how identity is formed before results, how doubt can be weakened, and how consistent action transforms belief into proof. More importantly, you will learn how to think, act and move like the version of yourself that already exists in your imagination. This is not about escaping reality. It is about creating one that reflects your highest potential. The line between ordinary and extraordinary is thinner than it seems, and it begins in the mind. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop worshipping reality. Reality has a quiet authority over most people. It sits in the background of every decision, whispering what is possible and what is not. It tells you who you are based on what you have done, what you can achieve based on what you have seen, and what you should expect based on where you are right now. And without even realizing it, you begin to obey it. You start adjusting your goals to match your current circumstances. You measure your future using your past. You accept limits that were never truly yours to begin with. This is what it means to worship reality, not in a dramatic way, but in small daily decisions where you choose what is familiar over what is possible. But here is something worth questioning. What you call reality is often nothing more than a snapshot. It is a temporary condition, not a permanent truth. It reflects what has already happened, not what could happen. Yet most people treat it like a final verdict. If they don't see immediate progress, they assume they are not capable. If they don't have the resources, they assume they cannot begin. If they fail once, they assume they are not meant for it. In other words, they allow present evidence to define future potential, and that is where the limitation begins, not in their ability, but in their interpretation. Think about this carefully. Every skill you admire, every achievement that seems impressive, every person you look up to, all of it once existed as something invisible. Before it became real, it was an idea that didn't match reality at the time. It looked unreasonable. It lacked proof. It didn't fit the current situation. Yet someone chose to believe in it anyway. They did not wait for reality to validate them. They moved first, and reality followed. That is the difference. Ordinary thinking reacts to reality. Extraordinary thinking reshapes it. This doesn't mean you ignore facts or pretend challenges don't exist. It means you stop giving them the final say. You begin to see reality as flexible, something that can be influenced, stretched, and eventually changed. Instead of asking, what is possible for me right now, you start asking, what am I willing to make possible over time? That shift may seem small, but it changes everything, because now you are no longer confined to your current position. You are connected to your potential. There is also a hidden danger in being too realistic. It often feels responsible, even mature. You tell yourself you are being practical, that you are staying grounded, but in many cases, it is simply fear wearing a more acceptable face. It is easier to say, I'm just being realistic, than to admit, I'm afraid this might not work. And when fear disguises itself as logic, it becomes harder to challenge. You stop questioning it. You accept it as truth. Over time, this quiet acceptance builds a life that feels safe, but not fulfilling. To stop worshipping reality, you have to interrupt this pattern. You have to consciously decide that your current circumstances do not get to define your identity or your direction. You begin by separating who you are from where you are. Where you are is temporary. Who you are becoming is something you get to choose. That distinction gives you power, because once you stop identifying with your current situation, you are free to act beyond it. This is where the idea of being delusional begins to make sense. It is not about denying reality. It is about refusing to be limited by it. It is about holding a vision that does not yet exist and treating it as if it matters just as much as what you can see right now. It requires a certain boldness, a willingness to look at your current life and say, this is not the final version. And more importantly, to act in a way that supports that belief, even when there is no immediate evidence. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will try to pull you back toward what is familiar. It will remind you of your past, your limitations, your doubts. That is normal. The mind is designed to protect, not to expand. But growth requires a different approach. It requires you to gently challenge those thoughts instead of automatically believing them. Just because something feels true does not mean it is permanent. Just because something has been your reality does not mean it has to remain that way. As you move forward, start noticing where you might be limiting yourself without realizing it. Pay attention to the goals you avoid setting, the risks you hesitate to take, the ideas you dismiss too quickly. Ask yourself whether those decisions are truly based on your potential or simply based on your current situation. This awareness alone can begin to shift your thinking, because once you see the pattern, you have the opportunity to change it. Stopping the worship of reality is not a single decision. It is a daily practice. It is choosing again and again to believe that your future can be different from your present. It is refusing to let temporary conditions become permanent conclusions. And most importantly, it is understanding that reality is not something you are forced to accept. It is something you are capable of shaping. Chapter 2. Dare to want more than you deserve. Desire is often treated as something that must be justified. You are taught, directly or indirectly, that you should want things that make sense for your current position, that your ambitions should be proportional to your experience, your background, your past results. In other words, you are encouraged to earn your desires before you even allow yourself to feel them. But extraordinary lives do not begin that way. They begin with a quiet, sometimes uncomfortable willingness to want more than seems reasonable, more than appears deserved. There is a strange rule that many people live by without ever questioning it. Who am I to want this? That question alone has stopped more dreams than failure ever could. It sounds humble, responsible, even mature, but underneath it, there is a deeper belief that your current identity determines the size of your future. And if you accept that, you will always stay within the boundaries of what you have already proven. You will only want what feels safe. You will only aim for what feels achievable, and in doing so, you will unknowingly limit what you are capable of becoming. Extraordinary people reverse this process. They do not wait until they feel worthy to desire something greater. They allow the desire to come first, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels undeserved. Because desire is not a reward, it is a signal. It is an internal indication of what you are capable of growing into. When you feel pulled towards something bigger, something beyond your current reality, that is not an accident. That is potential trying to express itself. But most people silence it too quickly. They label it as unrealistic, impractical, or out of reach. And just like that, they return to a smaller version of life. Think about the moment you allow yourself to want something bigger, truly want it, without immediately judging it. It creates a shift inside you. Your thinking expands. Your attention sharpens. You begin to notice possibilities that were invisible before. This is not magic. It is focus. When your mind accepts a larger goal, it starts searching for ways to move toward it. But when your desires are small, your thinking remains small as well. You do not stretch. You do not grow. You simply maintain. The challenge, of course, is that wanting more comes with discomfort. It creates tension between where you are and where you want to be, and most people interpret that tension as a sign to step back. They tell themselves, "This is too much," or "I'm not ready for this." But that tension is not a warning. It is a necessary part of growth. It is the space where change happens. If your desires do not challenge you, they will not transform you. There is also a fear of judgment attached to wanting more. When your goals are modest, they are easy to explain. They make sense to others. But when you start aiming higher, when you begin to express bigger ambitions, people may question you. They may not understand, and that can make you hesitate. You begin to shrink your desires to make them more acceptable, more reasonable. But in doing so, you trade authenticity for approval, and approval has never built an extraordinary life. To dare to want more than you deserve, you have to redefine what deserve means. It is not about your past performance. It is not about what you have already proven. It is about what you are willing to grow into. Your future is not limited by what you have earned. It is shaped by what you are willing to pursue. When you understand this, desire becomes a tool, not a threat. It becomes something you can use to guide your actions, rather than something you need to justify. This does not mean you sit back and expect everything to come to you. It means you allow yourself to set a direction that stretches you, and then you commit to becoming the person who can handle it. The desire comes first, and the growth follows, not the other way around. Waiting until you feel ready is one of the most subtle forms of procrastination, because readiness is not something you achieve before you begin. It is something you develop along the way. You may notice that when you start allowing bigger desires, your mind immediately tries to pull you back. It will remind you of your limitations, your lack of experience, your past failures. It will try to convince you that you are asking for too much. This is not because your desires are wrong. It is because your identity has not caught up yet. And that is exactly the point. Growth requires you to move beyond who you currently are. So instead of asking, "Do I deserve this?" begin asking, "Am I willing to become the person who can create this?" That question shifts your focus from limitation to responsibility. It puts the power back in your hands, because now the goal is not to justify your desire, but to rise to it. Allow yourself to want more, not recklessly, but intentionally. Let your desires stretch beyond your current situation. Let them challenge the way you see yourself, because the size of your desire often determines the size of your effort, your persistence, and ultimately, your results. Small desires lead to small actions. Big desires demand transformation. At the beginning, it may feel like you are reaching too far. It may feel uncomfortable, even unrealistic, but that is often how the right desire feels. It sits just beyond your current identity, calling you forward. And if you have the courage to follow it, not perfectly, but consistently, you will begin to notice something remarkable. What once felt undeserved will slowly become familiar. What once felt impossible will start to feel achievable. And eventually, you will look back and realize that the moment you allowed yourself to want more was the moment everything began to change. Chapter 3. Choose your identity before you earn it. There is a quiet assumption that shapes the way most people live their lives. The belief that identity is something you earn after results. You achieve something, and then you become someone. You prove yourself, and then you allow yourself to think differently. You succeed, and only then do you give yourself permission to see yourself as capable, confident, or disciplined. But this way of thinking keeps you trapped in a loop where nothing truly changes. Because if your identity depends on results, and your results depend on your identity, you remain stuck waiting for something that can only begin with a decision. Extraordinary people break this loop early. They understand something most overlook, that identity is not a reward, it is a choice. It is something you decide long before there is any external proof to support it. They do not wait to become confident after success. They choose to operate as someone confident first. They do not wait to become disciplined after achieving goals. They adopt the habits of a disciplined person before results appear. In other words, they shift internally before anything shifts externally. This may feel uncomfortable at first because it challenges everything that seems logical. Your mind will ask, how can I see myself as something I'm not yet? And that question feels valid, but it carries a hidden limitation. It assumes that your current identity is fixed, that it accurately defines who you are. But your current identity is simply a collection of past decisions, repeated behaviors, and reinforced beliefs. It is not permanent. It is not complete. And most importantly, it is not the final version of you. When you begin to choose your identity ahead of results, you are not pretending, you are directing. You are deciding what kind of person you are becoming, and then aligning your actions with that decision. Instead of saying, I will be disciplined once I achieve this goal, you say, I am a disciplined person, and this is how I act. That subtle shift changes your behavior immediately, because now your actions are not driven by motivation or mood, they are guided by identity. Think about how powerful that is. When you identify as something, your mind begins to protect that identity. It seeks consistency. It looks for ways to confirm it. If you see yourself as someone who follows through, you are more likely to act in alignment with that belief, even when it is difficult. If you see yourself as someone who gives up easily, you will unconsciously reinforce that pattern. Your identity becomes a filter through which your decisions are made. This is why waiting for results before changing your identity is so limiting. It places your transformation in the future, tied to conditions you have not yet met. But choosing your identity now brings that transformation into the present. It allows you to act as the person you want to become, rather than the person you have been. Of course, there will be resistance. Your past will try to remind you of who you used to be. Your mind will point out inconsistencies between your new identity and your current reality. It will say, this isn't you, or you haven't earned this yet. But that is simply the old identity trying to maintain control. It is familiar, comfortable, and deeply ingrained. Changing it requires patience and repetition. You do not need to be perfect in this process. You only need to be consistent. Every time you act in alignment with your chosen identity, you strengthen it. Every time you make a decision based on who you are becoming, rather than who you have been, you shift the pattern. Over time, these small actions accumulate. They create evidence. And eventually, what once felt like a choice begins to feel natural. It is important to understand that identity is not built in a single moment. It is reinforced through repeated behavior. But the direction of that reinforcement begins with a decision. You decide first, and then you prove it through action. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently enough that it becomes part of who you are. Consider the difference between someone who says, I'm trying to be more focused, and someone who says, I am a focused person. The first statement leaves room for inconsistency. It allows for hesitation. The second creates a standard. It influences behavior immediately. It sets an expectation that shapes choices throughout the day. That is the power of identity. As you move forward, begin to ask yourself a different question. Not what do I need to achieve, but who do I need to become? Because once you become that person, the actions required to achieve your goals become more natural. They are no longer forced or inconsistent. They are aligned with who you are. This is where many people underestimate the process. They focus on external strategies, on tactics and plans, while ignoring the internal shift that makes those strategies effective. But without the right identity, even the best plan will fail. And with the right identity, even imperfect action can lead to progress. Choosing your identity before you earn it is not about arrogance. It is about intention. It is about taking ownership of your direction, rather than waiting for circumstances to define it for you. It is about understanding that who you become is not something you discover. It is something you decide, and then reinforce through action. At first it may feel unfamiliar. It may feel like you are stepping into something that does not fully belong to you yet. But that is exactly what growth feels like. It is the process of expanding beyond your current self, of stepping into a version of you that exists in possibility before it exists in reality. And if you stay with it, if you continue to act in alignment with that chosen identity, you will reach a point where there is no longer a gap between who you say you are and what you do. Your actions will reflect your identity naturally, your results will begin to follow, and what once felt like a decision will become who you are. Chapter 4. Kill the need for approval. There is a subtle force that controls more decisions than most people realize, the need to be accepted, validated, and approved by others. It does not always show up in obvious ways. Sometimes it looks like hesitation before taking action. Sometimes it appears as overthinking, second-guessing, or delaying decisions until you feel more certain. And often, it disguises itself as being considerate or responsible. But underneath it all, there is a quiet question shaping your behavior. What will others think of me? From an early age, you are conditioned to seek approval. You learn that praise feels good, and rejection feels uncomfortable. You begin to associate acceptance with safety and disapproval with risk. Over time, this conditioning becomes internal. Even when no one is watching, you carry an imagined audience in your mind. You filter your choices through their expectations. You adjust your actions to avoid criticism. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to live a life that is shaped more by external opinions than by your own vision. The problem with this is not just that it limits your freedom, it disconnects you from your potential. Because extraordinary thinking rarely looks acceptable in the beginning. It often challenges norms, breaks expectations, and goes against what others consider reasonable. If your decisions are guided by approval, you will naturally avoid anything that might attract judgment. You will stay within the boundaries of what is understood, what is accepted, what is safe, and in doing so, you will remain within the boundaries of what is average. To move beyond this, you have to recognize something clearly. Approval is not a reliable measure of progress. In fact, in many cases, it can be misleading. When you follow familiar paths, people tend to support you because they understand it. It aligns with what they know. But when you step into something new, something uncertain, something that requires belief before proof, support often becomes silence, doubt, or even criticism. Not because you are wrong, but because what you are doing does not fit within their perspective. This is where many people turn back. They interpret lack of approval as a sign that they are making a mistake. They begin to question themselves, to shrink their vision, to adjust their actions until they feel accepted again. But what they are really doing is trading growth for comfort. They are choosing validation over possibility. Killing the need for approval does not mean you become indifferent or disconnected from others. It means you stop depending on their opinions to define your direction. It means you develop an internal standard that guides your decisions, rather than constantly looking outward for reassurance. This shift is not immediate, and it is not easy, because it requires you to face discomfort directly. It requires you to act even when you are not understood, to move forward even when you are not supported. One of the most important realizations in this process is understanding that people's opinions are often reflections of their own limitations. When someone doubts your ability, it is usually based on what they believe is possible for themselves. When someone discourages you, it often comes from their own fears and experiences. This does not make them wrong or bad. It simply means their perspective is limited. And if you allow that perspective to guide your choices, you adopt those same limitations. You also begin to notice that approval is inconsistent. It changes depending on the situation, the person, and even the timing. Someone who doubts you today may support you tomorrow, not because you have changed dramatically, but because your results have become visible. This reveals something important. Approval often follows success, not the other way around. Waiting for it before you act will keep you waiting indefinitely. Instead of seeking approval, begin to focus on alignment. Ask yourself whether your actions are aligned with your values, your vision, and the person you are becoming. This creates a different kind of confidence, not one that depends on others, but one that comes from within. It allows you to move forward with clarity, even when there is uncertainty. There will still be moments where doubt creeps in, where you feel the urge to seek reassurance. That is natural, but in those moments remind yourself why you started. Remind yourself that your path is not meant to be understood by everyone. It is meant to be followed by you, and sometimes that means walking alone for a while. As you continue to act without seeking approval, something begins to shift. You become less reactive to opinions. You start making decisions more quickly, more confidently. You trust your own judgment more deeply. And interestingly, you may find that the same people whose approval you once sought begin to respect you more, not because you asked for it, but because you no longer needed it. This is the paradox. The moment you stop chasing approval is often the moment you begin to receive it. But by then, it no longer controls you. It becomes irrelevant to your direction. Ultimately, killing the need for approval is about reclaiming your autonomy. It is about understanding that your life is not a performance for others, but a creation that reflects your own choices. It is about having the courage to follow your vision, even when it is not validated, even when it is misunderstood. Because if you are constantly waiting for others to agree with you before you move forward, you will always be one step behind your own potential. But when you let go of that need, when you decide that your direction does not require permission, you unlock a different kind of freedom, the freedom to become exactly who you choose to be. Chapter 5. Protect your mind from small thinkers. Not every voice around you deserves access to your mind. This may sound harsh at first, but it is one of the most important truths you will come to understand. The way you think, the way you see yourself, and the way you approach your future are constantly being shaped, not only by your own thoughts, but by the people you listen to every day. And if you are not careful, you will absorb perspectives that quietly shrink your vision without you even realizing it. Small thinking is not always obvious. It does not always sound negative or aggressive. In fact, it often comes disguised as concern, practicality, or experience. It sounds like, "Be careful, that's risky," or "Maybe you should aim for something more realistic," or "People like us don't usually do things like that." These statements are rarely meant to harm you. They are often spoken with good intentions, but intention does not change impact. When repeated enough, they begin to shape your perception of what is possible. The truth is, most people see the world through the lens of their own limitations. Their advice is not based on your potential, it is based on their experience. And if their experience is limited, their perspective will be limited as well. When they tell you something is difficult, they are often speaking about what felt difficult for them. When they say something cannot be done, they are often reflecting what they could not do. And when they suggest you lower your expectations, they are often projecting the level at which they feel comfortable. If you are not aware of this, you will begin to adopt these limitations as your own. You will start questioning ideas that once excited you. You will hesitate before taking action. You will gradually reduce your ambitions to fit within the boundaries of what others consider reasonable. And this shift does not happen suddenly. It happens slowly, through repeated exposure to small thinking. Protecting your mind does not mean you isolate yourself or ignore everyone around you. It means you become selective about what you allow to influence you. It means you listen, but you do not automatically accept. You consider perspectives, but you do not internalize them unless they align with your vision. This is a skill that requires awareness and discipline, because not every opinion deserves equal weight. One of the most important things you can do is learn to recognize the difference between guidance and limitation. True guidance expands your thinking. It challenges you, but it also encourages growth. It may point out risks, but it does not reduce your belief in what is possible. Limitation, on the other hand, contracts your thinking. It focuses on what could go wrong without acknowledging what could go right. It discourages action rather than refining it. You also need to understand that protecting your mind is not just about others. It is also about the environment you create for yourself. The content you consume, the conversations you engage in, the ideas you expose yourself to, all of these shape your thinking. If you constantly surround yourself with negativity, doubt, or average thinking, it will become your default. But if you intentionally expose yourself to ideas that expand your perspective, that challenge your assumptions, that inspire you to think bigger, your mind begins to adapt. This does not mean you only seek positivity or avoid difficulty. It means you choose inputs that strengthen your direction, not weaken it. You choose voices that push you forward, not pull you back. And most importantly, you become aware of how certain influences affect your thinking. There will be moments when you feel pressure to conform, to agree, to fit into the expectations around you. It may come from family, friends, or even society as a whole. And in those moments it can be tempting to adjust your thinking to match what is accepted. But every time you do that, you move further away from your own vision. You trade originality for approval, and over time that trade becomes costly. Protecting your mind requires a certain level of independence. It requires you to trust your own direction, even when it is not supported by those around you. It requires you to hold on to your vision, even when it is questioned, and it requires you to filter out noise that does not serve your growth. You do not need everyone to understand your path. You do not need everyone to agree with your goals. What you need is clarity. Clarity about what you want, and clarity about what influences support that direction. Once you have that, it becomes easier to decide what to accept and what to ignore. Over time, as you strengthen this ability, you will notice a shift in your thinking. You will become less reactive to doubt, less influenced by limitations, and more focused on your own path. You will begin to think more independently, more expansively, and that shift will reflect in your actions. Because at the end of the day, your life is shaped by the thoughts you allow to take root. If you fill your mind with limitations, your actions will follow. But if you protect your mind, if you intentionally choose what influences you, you create space for growth, for possibility, and for something greater than what currently exists. And that is the difference. Not everyone will think big. Not everyone will believe in more. But if you can protect your mind from small thinking, you give yourself the chance to build a life that is not limited by the perspectives of others, but expanded by your own. Chapter 6. Get comfortable being misjudged. There comes a point in any meaningful pursuit where you realize that being understood by everyone is no longer possible. The moment you begin to think differently, act differently, or aim for something beyond what is familiar, you step outside the frame that most people use to make sense of the world. And when you step outside that frame, you will be misunderstood. Not always loudly, not always directly, but in subtle ways, in the questions people ask, in the doubts they express, in the way they look at you when your actions don't match their expectations. Being misjudged is uncomfortable because it challenges a deep human need to be seen accurately, to be accepted, to belong. When people misunderstand your intentions or underestimate your vision, it can feel like a form of rejection. You may find yourself wanting to explain, to justify, to prove that what you are doing makes sense. And sometimes that instinct pulls you back. You begin to adjust your actions to avoid being questioned. You soften your ambitions to make them more acceptable. You choose clarity over courage. But if you look closely, you will notice something important. The people who go on to create extraordinary lives are rarely understood in the beginning. Their ideas seem impractical. Their actions seem unnecessary. Their persistence seems excessive. From the outside, it often looks like they are doing too much, risking too much, or believing too much. But from their perspective, they are simply following a vision that others cannot yet see. The reason for this disconnect is simple. People interpret your actions based on their own understanding, not your intention. They see your current position, your visible results, your past behavior, and they try to make sense of your future through that lens. But your future does not exist in their perspective yet. It exists in yours, and until it becomes visible, it will often be misunderstood. This is where you have a choice. You can spend your energy trying to correct every misunderstanding, trying to bring others into alignment with your thinking, or you can accept that not everyone needs to understand you for you to move forward. The first path drains you. It keeps you focused on external validation. The second path frees you. It allows you to direct your energy toward action, growth, and progress. Getting comfortable being misjudged does not mean you become indifferent or disconnected. It means you stop allowing misunderstanding to control your decisions. It means you accept that your path may not make sense to others, and that it doesn't have to. Your responsibility is not to be understood. Your responsibility is to follow through on what you believe is possible. There will be moments when the misunderstanding feels heavy, when people doubt you openly, when they question your choices, when they suggest you are wasting time or making a mistake. In those moments, it is easy to internalize those opinions, to let them influence your confidence. But this is where your clarity becomes essential. If you are clear about your direction, if you understand why you are doing what you are doing, those external voices lose their power. It is also important to recognize that being misjudged is often temporary. As your results begin to show, as your progress becomes visible, the same actions that once seemed questionable start to make sense to others. What was once seen as unnecessary becomes admirable. What was once misunderstood becomes obvious. But this shift happens after the fact, not before. If you wait for understanding before you act, you will remain in place. There is a certain strength that develops when you stop needing to be understood. You begin to rely less on external feedback and more on internal direction. You become more focused, more consistent. You make decisions based on your vision, not on how those decisions will be perceived. And over time, this independence becomes one of your greatest advantages. You also begin to notice that being misjudged filters your environment. It reveals who is willing to support you without full understanding, who is open to different perspectives, and who is limited by their own expectations. This clarity allows you to choose your influences more carefully. You align yourself with people who encourage growth, rather than those who resist it. At a deeper level, getting comfortable being misjudged is about identity. It is about deciding who you are independent of how others see you. When your identity is tied to external perception, you become reactive. You adjust constantly, trying to maintain a certain image. But when your identity is internally defined, you become stable. You move with intention, regardless of how it is interpreted. This does not mean you ignore feedback entirely. There is value in perspective, in learning, in refining your approach. But there is a difference between thoughtful feedback and limiting judgment. One helps you grow, the other holds you back. Learning to distinguish between the two is part of the process. As you continue on your path, remind yourself that misunderstanding is not a sign that you are on the wrong track. In many cases, it is a sign that you are doing something different, and difference is often the starting point of progress. If everyone immediately understands what you are doing, it is likely because it fits within what already exists. So allow yourself to be misunderstood, at least for a while. Allow yourself to move forward, without full agreement, without constant validation. Trust that clarity will come with time, that results will speak when words cannot. And most importantly, understand that your path is not meant to be obvious to everyone. It is meant to be followed by you, because the moment you become comfortable being misjudged is the moment you stop holding yourself back to fit into someone else's understanding. And that is where real movement begins. Chapter 7. Turn vision into obsession. A vision, no matter how powerful, is only the beginning. It is the spark, not the fire. Many people have ideas about the life they want, the person they want to become, the results they hope to achieve. But most of those visions remain distant, untouched, and unrealized. Not because they are impossible, but because they are not pursued with enough intensity. They stay as thoughts, not commitments. And that is where the gap begins. The difference between those who imagine and those who achieve is not just clarity, it is obsession. Obsession is what transforms a vision from something you occasionally think about into something you live with every day. It is what keeps your focus sharp when distractions appear. It is what drives you to act even when you don't feel motivated. Without it, your vision competes with everything else in your life. With it, your vision becomes the center around which everything else is organized. There is a common misunderstanding about obsession. It is often seen as unhealthy, extreme, or unbalanced. People associate it with burnout or loss of control, but there is a difference between destructive obsession and purposeful obsession. Destructive obsession consumes you without direction. Purposeful obsession channels your energy towards something meaningful. It is not about losing yourself, it is about fully committing yourself. When you turn your vision into an obsession, it begins to influence how you think, how you spend your time, and how you make decisions. You start asking different questions. Instead of wondering if something is possible, you begin asking how it can be done. Instead of waiting for the right moment, you begin creating it. Your attention shifts from passive thinking to active problem solving. This level of focus does not happen by accident. It is built through repetition. The more you engage with your vision by thinking about it, working toward it, refining it, the more it becomes part of your identity. It is no longer something you visit occasionally. It becomes something you carry with you. And once it reaches that point, it starts to guide your behavior naturally. You may notice that when your vision is weak, it is easy to lose focus. Distractions pull you away. Other priorities take over. You move forward for a while, then stop, then start again. But when your vision becomes an obsession, it creates consistency. It keeps you connected to your direction, even when external conditions change. It gives you a reason to continue when things become difficult. There will be moments when this intensity feels uncomfortable. You may feel like you are doing more than others, thinking differently than others, prioritizing things that others do not understand, and that is often true. Obsession separates you from average patterns. It requires a level of focus that most people are not willing to maintain, but that is exactly why it works. It creates a gap, a difference in effort, attention and persistence that leads to different results. It is also important to understand that obsession is not just about working harder, it is about caring deeper. It is about having a connection to your vision that goes beyond surface-level interest. When you truly care about something, you do not need constant reminders to act. You are naturally drawn to it. You return to it repeatedly. You look for ways to improve, to refine, to move forward. To build this kind of obsession, you need to stay close to your vision. Remind yourself why it matters. Visualize the outcome. Connect your daily actions to your larger goal. When your actions feel disconnected from your vision, motivation fades. But when you can see how each step contributes to something meaningful, your energy increases. You also need to protect your focus. Obsession requires attention, and attention is easily scattered. The more distractions you allow into your life, the harder it becomes to maintain intensity. This does not mean you eliminate everything else. It means you become intentional about where your energy goes. You prioritize what moves you forward and reduce what pulls you away. There will be times when progress feels slow, when results are not immediately visible. This is where obsession becomes most valuable. It keeps you moving, even when there is no external reward. It allows you to trust the process, to continue building even when the outcome is not yet clear. Without this level of commitment, it is easy to lose momentum during these phases. Over time, as you continue to act with this level of focus, something begins to change. What once felt like effort starts to feel natural. What once required discipline starts to feel automatic. Your identity shifts. You are no longer someone who is trying, you are someone who is committed. And that distinction changes everything. Turning vision into obsession is not about intensity for a short period. It is about sustained focus over time. It is about showing up consistently, not just when you feel inspired, but when it is required. It is about aligning your thoughts, your actions, and your priorities with what you want to create. Because at the end of the day, your vision will only become real if it becomes central, if it becomes something you return to again and again, something you build into your daily life, something you refuse to let fade. And when you reach that point, when your vision is no longer just an idea but a driving force, you will find that progress becomes inevitable, not immediate, not easy, but inevitable. Chapter 8. Act before you feel ready. Waiting to feel ready is one of the most convincing forms of delay. It feels responsible, even intelligent, to prepare, to think things through, to make sure everything is in place before you begin. You tell yourself you are being careful, that you are avoiding mistakes, that you will start when the timing is right. But if you pay close attention, you will notice that this sense of not ready yet rarely disappears on its own. It stretches, it evolves, it finds new reasons to stay. And before you realize it, what felt like preparation has quietly become hesitation. Readiness is often misunderstood. It is treated as a condition you must reach before taking action, as if confidence, clarity, and certainty will arrive fully formed if you wait long enough. But in reality, readiness is not a starting point. It is a result. It is something that develops through action, not before it. The more you move, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more capable you become. And through that process, what once felt intimidating begins to feel manageable. The challenge is that action, especially at the beginning, feels uncomfortable. There is uncertainty. There is the possibility of failure. There is the awareness that you may not perform as well as you would like. And because of that discomfort, your mind looks for a way to delay. It suggests that you need more time, more information, more confidence. It convinces you that waiting is the smarter choice. But what it is really doing is protecting you from discomfort, not guiding you toward growth. If you look at any skill you have developed, any area where you feel confident today, you will notice a pattern. You did not begin with certainty. You did not start at your best. You began with limited knowledge, with mistakes, with adjustments, and through repeated action, you improved. That is how progress works. It is built through movement, not through waiting. Acting before you feel ready requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Am I ready to do this?" you begin asking, "What is the smallest step I can take right now?" This question removes the pressure of perfection. It focuses your attention on movement rather than mastery. Because you do not need to have everything figured out to begin, you only need enough clarity to take the next step. There is also a hidden benefit in starting before you feel ready. It forces you to engage with reality. Instead of imagining what could go wrong, you begin to experience what actually happens. And often what you feared is not as overwhelming as you expected. You adapt, you adjust, you find solutions, and through that process, your confidence grows, not because you waited, but because you acted. You may still feel doubt as you move forward. That is normal. Acting before you feel ready does not eliminate fear, it changes your relationship with it. Instead of waiting for fear to disappear, you learn to move with it. You understand that discomfort is part of the process, not a signal to stop. And over time, that discomfort becomes familiar. It loses its intensity. It becomes something you can manage. Another important aspect of this approach is momentum. When you take action, even small action, you create movement. And movement has a way of building on itself. One step leads to another. One decision leads to the next. But when you wait, when you hesitate, you remain in a state of stillness. And in that stillness, doubt grows. Questions multiply. The task begins to feel larger than it actually is. You do not need to eliminate uncertainty to move forward. You need to reduce the gap between thinking and doing. The longer you stay in your head, analyzing, questioning, planning without acting, the harder it becomes to begin. But the moment you take a step, even an imperfect one, you shift into a different state. You become engaged. You become active. And from that state, progress becomes possible. There will be moments when you look back and realize that you started before you were fully prepared, and instead of regret, you will feel appreciation, because that decision allowed you to grow faster, to learn more, to gain experience that you could not have gained any other way. Waiting would not have made you better, it would have kept you in place. Acting before you feel ready also builds trust in yourself. Each time you move forward despite uncertainty, you reinforce the idea that you are capable of handling what comes next. You prove to yourself that you do not need perfect conditions to make progress, and that trust becomes a foundation. It supports future decisions. It makes it easier to take risks, to try new things, to step outside your comfort zone. This does not mean you act without thought or direction. It means you avoid overthinking to the point of paralysis. You gather enough information to begin, and then you learn through doing. You adjust as you go. You refine your approach based on real experience, not imagined scenarios. At its core, this chapter is about understanding that action creates clarity, not the other way around. The more you do, the more you see. The more you see, the more you understand. And through that process, what once felt uncertain becomes familiar. So instead of waiting for readiness, create it. Start where you are, with what you have, and take the first step. Then take the next, and the next. Because the path forward is not revealed before you begin. It is revealed as you move. Chapter 9. Make discipline your identity. Discipline is often misunderstood as something external, something you force yourself to do when motivation is low. It is seen as effort, as restriction, as a temporary push to get through difficult tasks. And because of that, most people treat discipline as something they visit occasionally, not something they live by. They rely on motivation when it is available, and when it fades, as it always does, their consistency fades with it. This cycle repeats over and over again, creating effort without lasting progress. But discipline, in its most powerful form, is not something you do. It is something you become. It is an identity, not a reaction. When discipline becomes part of who you are, it no longer depends on how you feel in a given moment. It is not influenced by mood, by convenience, or by external conditions. It is steady. It is reliable. It shows up whether you feel like it or not. The difference between these two approaches is subtle but profound. When you rely on motivation, your actions are inconsistent. You act when you feel inspired, and you hesitate when you do not. Your progress becomes unpredictable, tied to emotional highs and lows. But when discipline becomes your identity, your actions stabilize. You do what needs to be done because it aligns with who you are, not because you feel like doing it. To understand this more clearly, consider how identity shapes behavior. If you see yourself as someone who follows through, who shows up, who finishes what they start, you will naturally act in alignment with that belief, not perfectly, but consistently. On the other hand, if you see yourself as someone who struggles with consistency, who needs motivation to act, who often delays, your behavior will reflect that identity as well. In both cases, your actions are not random, they are guided by how you see yourself. This is why trying to be more disciplined without changing your identity often fails. You are attempting to act in a way that does not match your current self-image, and while you may succeed for a short period, the old identity eventually pulls you back. The solution is not to force discipline, it is to adopt it as part of who you are. This begins with a decision. You decide that you are a disciplined person, not based on your past, not based on your current habits, but based on who you choose to become. And once that decision is made, you begin to act in alignment with it. You do not wait for motivation. You do not negotiate with your feelings. You follow through because it is consistent with your identity. At first, this may feel unnatural. Your old patterns will still be present. You may feel resistance. You may notice a gap between your intention and your behavior. But this is part of the process. Identity is not changed in a single moment. It is reinforced through repetition. Every time you act in alignment with your new identity, you strengthen it. Every time you follow through despite discomfort, you create evidence that supports it. It is important to understand that discipline is not about perfection. It is about consistency. There will be days when your energy is low, when your focus is not at its best, when progress feels slow. But discipline is not about having ideal conditions. It is about showing up regardless of conditions. It is about maintaining movement, even if that movement is small. One of the most powerful ways to build this identity is through simple, repeatable actions. You do not need to start with something overwhelming. In fact, starting too big often leads to inconsistency. Instead, focus on actions you can repeat daily. Actions that reinforce the idea that you are someone who follows through. Over time, these small actions accumulate. They create a pattern, and that pattern becomes your identity. You will also begin to notice that discipline reduces decision fatigue. When your actions are based on identity, You spend less time debating with yourself. You do not ask, "Should I do this today?" You simply do it. This clarity saves energy. It allows you to focus on execution rather than negotiation, and over time, this becomes a significant advantage. There will still be moments when you feel tempted to break the pattern, to skip, to delay. In those moments, remind yourself that every action is a vote for your identity. Each decision either reinforces who you are becoming or pulls you back toward who you have been. When you see it this way, discipline becomes less about the task and more about the person you are choosing to be. As this identity strengthens, you will begin to trust yourself more. You will know that when you commit to something, you will follow through. That trust builds confidence, not the kind that comes from external success, but the kind that comes from internal reliability. You become someone you can depend on, and that changes how you approach everything. Making discipline your identity is not about restriction, it is about freedom. It frees you from inconsistency. It frees you from reliance on fleeting motivation. It gives you control over your actions, regardless of how you feel. And with that control comes progress, because at the end of the day, success is not built on occasional effort. It is built on repeated action. It is built on showing up again and again, even when it is not exciting, even when it is not easy. And when discipline becomes who you are, that repetition becomes natural. You no longer chase progress. You create it, one consistent action at a time. Chapter 10. Rewire the way you speak to yourself. There is a voice that follows you everywhere. It speaks when you wake up, when you hesitate, when you fail, when you succeed. It comments on your actions, interprets your experiences, and quietly shapes how you see yourself and the world around you. Most of the time you are not even aware of it. It feels automatic, natural, almost invisible, but this internal dialogue is one of the most powerful forces in your life. Because the way you speak to yourself becomes the way you believe, and what you believe becomes the way you act. Many people assume that their thoughts are simply reflections of reality, that if something feels true internally, it must be true externally. But this is not always the case. Your internal language is often shaped by past experiences, repeated patterns, and borrowed opinions. It carries old conclusions, outdated beliefs, and unexamined assumptions. And if you do not question it, you will continue to operate within those limits, even when they no longer serve you. Pay attention to how you speak to yourself when things go wrong. Notice the tone, the words, the conclusions you draw. Do you say, "I always mess things up," or "I'm not good at this," or "this isn't for me"? These statements may feel harmless, even honest, but they carry weight. They reinforce identity, they create patterns, and over time, they become self-fulfilling. Because once you believe something about yourself, your behavior begins to align with it. Rewiring your internal language begins with awareness. You cannot change what you do not notice. Start by observing your thoughts without immediately accepting them. When a limiting statement appears, pause and question it. Ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just a familiar pattern? This simple interruption creates space. It prevents automatic beliefs from taking hold. The next step is to replace, not just remove. Empty space does not create change. Intentional language does. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," shift to "I'm learning how to do this." Instead of "I'm not disciplined," shift to "I'm becoming more consistent." These changes may seem small, but they alter the direction of your thinking. They move you from limitation to possibility, from fixed identity to growth. This is not about blind positivity or ignoring challenges. It is about choosing language that supports progress rather than prevents it. You can acknowledge difficulty without defining yourself by it. You can recognize mistakes without turning them into permanent labels. The goal is not to create perfect thoughts, it is to create useful ones. Your mind responds to repetition. The more you use a certain type of language, the more natural it becomes. At first, changing your internal dialogue may feel forced or unnatural. That is expected. You are interrupting patterns that have been reinforced over time, but with consistency, the new language begins to take hold. It becomes familiar, and eventually it becomes automatic. You will also notice that your internal language influences your emotional state. When your thoughts are limiting, your energy drops. You feel uncertain, hesitant, restricted. But when your language supports growth, your energy shifts. You feel more open, more capable, more willing to act. This is not coincidence. Your thoughts shape your perception, and your perception shapes your experience. Another important aspect of this process is tone. It is not just what you say to yourself, but how you say it. Many people speak to themselves in a way they would never speak to someone else. They are harsh, critical, impatient, and while they believe this pushes them to improve, it often does the opposite. It creates resistance, not progress. Growth requires challenge, but it also requires support. Imagine guiding yourself the way a strong, patient mentor would. Honest, but not destructive. Direct, but not discouraging. This shift in tone creates a different internal environment, one where you can push yourself without tearing yourself down. It allows you to improve without losing confidence. As you continue to rewire your internal language, you will begin to notice subtle changes in your behavior. You will take action more easily. You will recover from setbacks more quickly. You will approach challenges with a different mindset, not because the external situation has changed, but because your interpretation of it has. It is also important to understand that your internal dialogue does not need to be perfect to be effective. There will still be moments of doubt, moments where old patterns resurface. The goal is not to eliminate these completely, but to reduce their influence, to catch them earlier, to question them more often, and to replace them more consistently. Over time, this practice builds something powerful: self-trust. You begin to rely on your own voice, not as a source of limitation, but as a source of direction. You know that when challenges arise, your internal response will support you, not hold you back. And that trust creates stability. It allows you to move forward with confidence, even in uncertain situations. Rewiring the way you speak to yourself is not a quick process, but it is a transformative one, because when your internal language changes, everything else begins to follow. Your thoughts become more constructive, your actions become more consistent, your identity becomes more aligned with who you are becoming, and eventually, the voice that once limited you becomes the voice that moves you forward. Chapter 11. Use pain as proof you're growing. Pain has a way of capturing your attention more than anything else. It interrupts your comfort, challenges your expectations, and forces you to confront something you would rather avoid. Naturally, most people try to escape it as quickly as possible. They interpret pain as a sign that something is wrong, that they have taken a wrong step, that they should slow down or stop altogether. But what if that interpretation is incomplete? What if instead of being a signal to retreat, pain is often a sign that you are moving in the right direction? Growth, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It requires you to stretch beyond what is familiar, to operate outside your usual patterns, to confront uncertainty and resistance. And whenever you do that, friction appears. That friction is what you feel as pain. It can show up as frustration when progress is slow, as doubt when results are not immediate, as exhaustion when effort is required over long periods. But these experiences are not evidence that you are failing. They are evidence that you are expanding. Think about any skill you have ever developed. In the beginning, it likely felt awkward, difficult, even discouraging. You made mistakes. You struggled to understand. You felt like you were not good enough. But over time, through repeated effort, that discomfort decreased. What was once difficult became manageable, and eventually it became natural. The pain did not mean you were incapable. It meant you were in the process of learning. The problem is that most people do not stay with that process long enough. The moment discomfort appears, they question their direction. They assume they are not suited for it, that it is too hard, that it is not meant for them, and so they stop. They return to what feels familiar, what feels safe. But in doing so, they also return to a state of no growth. They avoid pain, but they also avoid progress. Using pain as proof requires a shift in how you interpret your experience. Instead of asking, "Why is this so hard?" Begin asking, what is this teaching me? Instead of seeing discomfort as a barrier, begin to see it as feedback. It is showing you where you need to improve, where you need to adapt, where you need to persist. This does not remove the difficulty, but it gives it purpose. There is also a difference between productive pain and unnecessary suffering. Productive pain comes from effort, from learning, from pushing your limits. It is temporary, and it leads to growth. Unnecessary suffering, on the other hand, often comes from repeating the same mistakes without reflection, from staying in situations that do not serve you, from ignoring what needs to change. The goal is not to seek pain blindly, but to recognize which discomfort is moving you forward and which is holding you back. As you begin to see pain differently, your response to it changes. You become less reactive. You do not immediately look for a way out. Instead, you stay with the process. You observe what is happening. You adjust your approach if needed, but you do not abandon your direction. This creates resilience, not the kind that avoids difficulty, but the kind that moves through it. There will still be moments when the intensity feels overwhelming, when progress seems distant, when effort feels heavy, when doubt becomes louder. In those moments, it is easy to forget why you started. It is easy to lose perspective, but this is where your mindset becomes critical. Remind yourself that growth is not linear. It does not always feel rewarding in the moment. Often the most significant progress happens beneath the surface, unnoticed until it becomes visible. Pain also has a way of revealing your limits, not as fixed boundaries but as areas of potential expansion. When something feels difficult, it is often because you are operating at the edge of your current ability, and that edge is exactly where growth happens. If everything feels easy, you are likely staying within what you already know, but when you challenge yourself, when you push beyond that comfort zone, discomfort is inevitable. Over time, as you continue to move through these experiences, your relationship with pain begins to change. It becomes less intimidating. You start to expect it, to accept it as part of the process, and with that acceptance comes a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that everything will be easy, but the confidence that you can handle difficulty when it arises. This shift is powerful, because it removes one of the biggest obstacles to progress, the fear of discomfort. When you are no longer trying to avoid pain at all costs, you become more willing to take action, to try new things, to persist through challenges. You are no longer controlled by the need to feel comfortable. You are guided by the desire to grow. It is important to remember that pain in this context is not something to glorify or seek unnecessarily. It is something to understand and use. It is a signal that you are engaged in something that requires effort, that demands change, that has the potential to move you forward. And when you learn to interpret it this way, it loses its power to stop you. Instead of seeing pain as a reason to quit, you begin to see it as a reason to continue, as confirmation that you are not standing still, that you are not settling, that you are actively shaping your path. And over time, this perspective transforms your experience. What once felt like a barrier becomes part of your progress, because in the end, growth is not comfortable, it is not easy, but it is possible. And often the very discomfort you are trying to avoid is the same force that is trying to move you forward. Chapter 12. Build a world that matches your vision. Your environment is always shaping you, whether you notice it or not. The spaces you spend time in, the people you interact with, the content you consume, and even the routines you follow, all of it quietly influences how you think, how you feel, and how you act. Most people underestimate this influence. They focus on willpower, on motivation, on trying to force themselves to stay consistent, while ignoring the fact that their surroundings are constantly pulling them in a different direction. If your environment does not support your vision, it will eventually weaken it. You may start with strong intention, clear goals, and a deep desire to change, but if everything around you reinforces old habits, distractions, or limitations, maintaining that direction becomes difficult. Not impossible, but unnecessarily hard. Over time, friction builds, your energy drains, and what once felt exciting begins to feel exhausting. This is why building a world that matches your vision is not optional, it is essential. Because when your environment is aligned with your goals, it reduces resistance. It makes the right actions easier and the wrong actions less appealing. It supports your focus instead of competing with it. And most importantly, it reinforces the identity you are trying to build. Start by looking at your physical environment. The spaces you occupy every day send signals to your mind. A cluttered space can create distraction. An unstructured environment can lead to unstructured behavior. On the other hand, a clean, intentional space can improve clarity and focus. This does not require perfection or complexity. It requires awareness. Small adjustments, removing distractions, organizing your space, creating a dedicated area for focused work, can have a significant impact on how you show up. But your environment is not just physical, it is also social. The people you spend time with influence your thinking more than you realize. Their habits, their attitudes, their expectations all become part of your reference point. If you are surrounded by people who think small, who avoid challenges, who settle for comfort, it becomes harder to maintain a different standard, not because you are weak, but because you are human. You naturally adapt to what is around you. This does not mean you need to distance yourself from everyone who thinks differently. It means you become intentional about influence. You seek out conversations that expand your thinking. You spend time with people who challenge you to grow, who support your vision, who operate at a level you aspire to reach. And when that is not immediately available, you create that environment through what you read, what you listen to, and what you watch. The content you consume is one of the most overlooked aspects of your environment. Every idea you expose yourself to leaves an impression. It shapes your beliefs, your expectations, your perception of what is possible. If you constantly consume content that is negative, distracting, or limiting, it will affect your mindset. But if you intentionally choose content that educates, inspires, and challenges you, it becomes a tool for growth. Your routines also play a critical role. What you do repeatedly becomes automatic, and what becomes automatic shapes your results. If your daily routine does not support your goals, you will constantly feel like you are starting over. But when your routine is aligned with your vision, progress becomes more natural. You do not have to rely on constant decision-making. You follow a structure that moves you forward. Building this kind of environment does not happen all at once. It is a process of adjustment. You notice what is helping you and what is holding you back. You make changes, small at first, then more intentional over time. You remove what distracts you. You add what supports you, and gradually your environment begins to reflect your direction. There will still be moments when external conditions are not ideal, when you cannot control every aspect of your surroundings. In those situations, your internal discipline becomes important. But even then, the more you can align your environment, the less you have to rely on willpower alone. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is moving from reacting to your environment to designing it. Instead of adapting to whatever is around you, you begin to shape your surroundings to support your goals. You think ahead. You prepare. You create conditions that make it easier to stay consistent. As you do this, you will notice something interesting. Your behavior begins to change with less effort. You feel more focused, more aligned, more consistent. Not because you are trying harder, but because your environment is supporting you. It is reinforcing the habits you want to build. It is reducing the friction that once slowed you down. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Your environment supports your actions reinforce your identity, and your identity strengthens your vision. Each part works together, creating momentum, and with that momentum, progress becomes more sustainable. Building a world that matches your vision is not about control, it is about alignment. It is about creating conditions that make your desired path the natural path. It is about understanding that while you cannot control everything, you can influence more than you think, because in the end your environment is not separate from your success, it is part of it. And when you take the time to shape it intentionally, you give yourself an advantage that goes beyond effort. You create a space where growth is not forced but supported, where consistency is not a struggle but a result. And that is where real change begins to feel possible. Chapter 13. Outlast everyone. Talent attracts attention, but endurance creates results. In the beginning of any pursuit, it is easy to be impressed by speed. How quickly someone starts, how fast they improve, how confidently they move. But time reveals something deeper. It exposes who can continue when progress slows, when excitement fades, when effort becomes repetitive. Because in most cases, success is not determined by who starts the strongest, but by who refuses to stop. Many people underestimate the power of staying in the game. They believe success is about finding the perfect strategy, making the right move at the right time, or having a natural advantage. And while those things can help, they are rarely the deciding factor. What truly separates those who succeed from those who don't is persistence over time. The ability to keep going when it is no longer exciting, when results are delayed, when the process becomes difficult. The reason this is so powerful is simple. Most people quit. Not always dramatically, not always in a single moment, but gradually. They lose consistency, they shift focus, they become distracted, they start something new before finishing what they began, and over time their effort becomes scattered. They never stay with one path long enough to see what it could become. Outlasting others does not require you to be the smartest, the most talented, or the most experienced. It requires you to be consistent. It requires you to continue when others stop, to show up when it is no longer convenient, to keep moving when there is no immediate reward. This is where the real separation happens, not in moments of intensity, but in long periods of steady effort. There will be phases where progress feels invisible, where you are putting in effort, but the results are not yet clear. These are the moments where many people begin to question themselves. They wonder if it is working, if it is worth it, if they should change direction, and sometimes adjustment is necessary. But often what is needed is not a new path, but more time on the current one. Time has a way of compounding effort. What feels small and insignificant in the moment builds over repetition. Skills improve, understanding deepens, efficiency increases. But this compounding only happens if you stay consistent long enough. If you leave too early, you never reach the point where your effort begins to multiply. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you commit to outlasting others. You stop looking for quick results. You stop comparing your early stages to someone else's later stages. You begin to think in longer time frames. Weeks turn into months, months turn into years, and with that shift your approach changes. You become more patient, more focused, more resilient. Outlasting does not mean forcing yourself endlessly without reflection. It means staying engaged, adjusting when necessary, but not abandoning your direction at the first sign of difficulty. It means understanding that challenges are part of the process, not indicators that you should quit. And it means trusting that consistent effort over time will lead somewhere meaningful. There will be moments when you feel behind, when others seem to be moving faster, achieving more, progressing quicker. In those moments, it is easy to feel discouraged. But comparison often lacks context. You do not see their full journey. You do not see their struggles, their setbacks, their starting point. And more importantly, their path is not yours. Your advantage lies in your ability to stay focused on your own direction, to continue building, improving, learning, to trust that your pace, if consistent, will take you where you need to go. Because progress is not always visible immediately. Sometimes it is building quietly, beneath the surface, until it reaches a point where it becomes undeniable. There is also a simplicity to this approach that makes it powerful. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to have everything figured out. You only need to keep going, to return to your work again and again, to refine, to improve, to persist. Over time, this consistency creates a body of work, a level of skill, a depth of experience that cannot be replicated quickly. As you continue, you will begin to notice that fewer people remain. The initial crowd, the excitement, the competition, it starts to thin out. Not because the opportunity has disappeared, but because the commitment required to continue has increased. And this is where your persistence becomes your advantage. Because while others move on, you stay. Outlasting everyone is not about defeating others. It is about staying true to your path long enough to see it through. It is about understanding that time is not your enemy, it is your ally, if you use it correctly. Every day you continue, every effort you make, every step you take adds to your progress. Eventually, what once felt slow begins to accelerate. The foundation you have built starts to support faster growth. Your experience allows you to move more efficiently. Your consistency creates momentum, and what once seemed distant begins to come closer. But this only happens if you stay. So instead of asking how quickly you can achieve something, begin asking how long you are willing to continue. Because in the end, the people who succeed are often not the ones who had the best start, but the ones who refuse to stop. And when you commit to that, when you decide that you will stay in the process long enough, you give yourself an advantage that cannot be easily matched. You become someone who finishes. Chapter 14. Become someone unrecognizable. Growth is often imagined as improvement, a better version of who you already are, a refined version of your current habits, a slightly upgraded version of your identity. But real transformation is deeper than that. It is not just about adding new behaviors or achieving new results. It is about becoming someone so different in mindset, standards, and actions that your old self would barely recognize you. And that level of change requires more than effort. It requires letting go. Most people want progress without loss. They want to move forward without leaving anything behind. They try to hold on to their old habits, their familiar thinking, their comfortable patterns, while expecting a completely different outcome. But growth does not work that way. Every new level demands a release of something from the previous one. Old beliefs, old routines, old identities, they cannot all come with you. This is where resistance begins, not because you are incapable of change, but because part of you is attached to what is familiar. Even if your current habits are limiting, they are known, they feel safe, they require less effort, and letting go of them can feel uncertain, even uncomfortable. But if you stay attached to your old self, you will continue to create the same results. Becoming unrecognizable starts with a shift in standards. You begin to expect more from yourself, not in a harsh or unrealistic way, but in a consistent, intentional way. What you once accepted as normal no longer feels enough. You raise the level of what you consider acceptable in your actions, your thinking, your discipline, and that shift changes your behavior. Because your actions always rise or fall to meet your standards, you also begin to think differently. You stop approaching challenges with hesitation and start approaching them with responsibility. Instead of asking, "Can I do this?" you begin asking, "How will I do this?" That change in thinking moves you from doubt to problem solving. It shifts your focus from limitation to possibility. At the same time, you become more aware of your patterns. You notice the habits that no longer serve you, the thoughts that hold you back, the behaviors that keep you in the same place. And instead of ignoring them, you begin to change them. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently. You replace what is limiting with what is aligned with your future. This process requires honesty. You have to be willing to look at yourself clearly, without avoiding the truth. To recognize where you are falling short, where you are holding back, where you are choosing comfort over growth. And instead of judging yourself for it, you use that awareness to make adjustments. There will be moments when this transformation feels uncomfortable, when you notice that your old habits no longer fit, but your new ones are not fully established. You may feel in between, no longer who you used to be, but not yet who you are becoming. This is a normal part of the process. It is a transition, not a failure. As you continue, you will begin to see changes in how you act. You make decisions more quickly. You follow through more consistently. You become less reactive to distractions, less influenced by temporary emotions. Your behavior starts to reflect your intention more clearly. Others may notice this change before you fully recognize it yourself. They may comment on your discipline, your focus, your mindset. Some will be inspired. Others may feel uncomfortable, because when you change, it challenges the expectations around you. It disrupts what people are used to, and not everyone will respond positively to that. This is where you need to stay grounded in your direction. Your transformation is not meant to fit into others' expectations. It is meant to align with your vision, and that may require you to move differently, to think differently, to act differently than those around you. Over time, as these changes accumulate, the difference becomes clear. The way you handle challenges, the way you use your time, the way you think about your future, it all shifts. And when you look back, you realize that you are no longer operating from the same identity. The things that once felt difficult now feel natural. The habits that once required effort now feel automatic. Becoming unrecognizable is not about losing yourself. It is about discovering what you are capable of becoming. It is about moving beyond the limitations of your past and stepping into a version of yourself that reflects your potential. It does not happen in a single moment. It happens through repeated decisions, through consistent action, through a willingness to let go of what no longer serves you and embrace what moves you forward. And the most powerful part of this process is that it is within your control. You do not need permission. You do not need perfect conditions. You only need the decision to change and the commitment to follow through. Because the person you are becoming is not defined by where you started. It is defined by the choices you continue to make. And if you stay with that process, if you continue to raise your standards, to refine your actions, to align your identity, you will reach a point where your old self feels distant, not because you rejected it, but because you grew beyond it. And that is what transformation looks like. Chapter 15. Live from the future, not the past. Most people make decisions based on who they have been, not who they are becoming. They look at their past experiences, their past results, their past limitations, and they use those as a reference point for what they should do next. It feels logical. It feels safe. After all, the past is known. It provides evidence, patterns, and familiarity. But there is a hidden cost to living this way. When your decisions are anchored in the past, your future begins to look like a repetition rather than a transformation. Your past can teach you, but it should not define you. It holds information, not identity. Yet many people carry it as if it is permanent proof of who they are. They say, "I've always been like this," or "This is just how I am," or "I've tried before and it didn't work." These statements may feel true, but they are also limiting. They turn temporary experiences into fixed conclusions. And once those conclusions settle in, they begin to shape your choices. Living from the future requires a different approach. Instead of asking, "What have I done before?" you begin asking, "What would the person I want to become do now?" This question shifts your perspective immediately. It disconnects your actions from your past patterns and connects them to your future identity. It allows you to act in alignment with who you are becoming, rather than who you have been. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. Your mind is used to relying on past references. It looks for certainty, for evidence, for proof. When you begin to act from the future, that certainty is not always there. You are stepping into something that has not yet been fully formed. But that is where growth happens, not in repeating what you already know, but in creating something new. Imagine the version of yourself you are working toward, the way they think, the way they act, the way they handle challenges. They are more disciplined, more focused, more consistent. They do not wait for perfect conditions. They make decisions with clarity. Now consider this. If that version of you already existed, how would they approach your current situation? What would they prioritize? What would they ignore? What actions would they take without hesitation? This is not about pretending or imagining without action. It is about using your future self as a guide for your present behavior. Each time you make a decision, you align it with that version of you. You begin to close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. There will be moments when your past tries to pull you back. Old habits, old thoughts, old reactions, they will appear automatically. That is normal. But instead of following them, you pause, you recognize the pattern, and then you choose differently, not based on what feels familiar, but based on what is aligned with your future. This process builds awareness. It helps you see where your past is influencing your present, and more importantly, it gives you the ability to change that influence. Because every moment presents a choice to repeat the past or to create something new. Living from the future also changes how you handle challenges. When you are focused on your past, difficulties often feel like confirmation of limitation. You see setbacks as proof that things will not work. But when you are focused on your future, challenges become part of the process. They are not indicators of failure. They are steps toward growth. You handle them differently. You respond with intention rather than reaction. Over time, as you continue to make decisions from this perspective, your behavior begins to shift. What once required effort becomes more natural. Your actions align more closely with your goals. Your identity starts to reflect the person you are becoming, and gradually, your reality begins to change. It is important to understand that this is not about ignoring your past completely. There are lessons there, experiences that can guide you, mistakes that can teach you. But those lessons are tools, not limits. They are meant to inform your decisions, not restrict them. As you practice this approach, you will begin to feel a sense of control over your direction. You are no longer reacting to what has already happened. You are actively shaping what is coming next. Your decisions become more intentional, your actions become more aligned, and your progress becomes more consistent. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be moments where the path is not clear, but instead of looking backward for answers, you look forward. You trust the version of yourself you are building. You trust that your actions, aligned with that vision, will lead somewhere meaningful. Living from the future is not a single decision, it is a daily practice. It is choosing, again and again, to act in alignment with your potential rather than your history. It is refusing to let past limitations dictate future possibilities. And as you continue, something powerful happens. The gap between your present and your future begins to close. The person you once imagined becomes the person you are becoming. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily, because in the end your life is not shaped by where you have been. It is shaped by the decisions you make today, and when those decisions are guided by your future rather than your past, you begin to create something different, not a repetition, but a transformation. Conclusion. Every extraordinary life begins in a place that looks ordinary from the outside. There is no visible proof at the start, no clear evidence that something remarkable is about to unfold. What exists instead is a decision, quiet, often unnoticed but powerful. A decision to believe in something before it is real. A decision to think differently, act differently, and persist when it would be easier to stop. That decision is what separates those who remain where they are from those who move beyond it. Throughout this journey, you have seen that what the world often calls delusion is not weakness, it is the beginning of creation. It is the ability to hold a vision that does not yet exist and treat it as if it matters. It is choosing identity before evidence, action before certainty, and persistence before recognition. It is refusing to let current reality define future possibility. You have learned that reality is not fixed. It responds to consistent action, to focused thinking, to deliberate effort over time. You have seen that your identity is not something you discover, it is something you build, that your internal language shapes your direction, that discipline, when it becomes who you are, creates consistency. That pain is not a signal to stop, but often a sign that you are growing. You have also seen how easily progress can be slowed, not by lack of ability, but by the need for approval, by the influence of small thinking, by the fear of being misunderstood. And you have learned that protecting your mind, staying focused, and continuing when others stop, are not just helpful, they are necessary, but none of this matters if it remains an idea. Understanding alone does not create change. It is the application, the repetition, the daily choices that turn these principles into results. It is how you think when things are uncertain. It is how you act when motivation fades. It is how you respond when progress feels slow. There will be moments when doubt returns, when your vision feels distant, when the path feels unclear. That is part of the process. It does not mean you are failing, it means you are in the middle of building something that takes time. And in those moments what matters most is not perfection but persistence. continuing, even when it is difficult, showing up, even when it is not exciting, staying with it, even when there is no immediate reward. Because over time, something begins to shift. The actions that once felt forced become natural. The mindset you had to remind yourself of becomes automatic. The identity you chose begins to feel real. And gradually, your external reality starts to reflect those internal changes. You do not wake up one day suddenly transformed. You become transformed through consistent decisions, repeated over time, through small actions that align with a bigger vision, through the willingness to keep going, even when progress is not immediately visible. And then at some point you look back. You see how far you have come. You realize that what once felt unrealistic now feels normal, that what once seemed impossible is now part of your life. And you understand that the line between where you started and where you are now was never about luck, talent, or perfect conditions. It was about belief. Not blind belief, but deliberate belief. The kind that is supported by action. The kind that continues even when it is challenged. The kind that refuses to shrink to fit current circumstances. This is what it means to be delusional in the right way. Not disconnected from reality, but committed to creating a new one. Not waiting for proof, but building it. Not asking for permission, but deciding. And now that decision is yours, because the truth is simple. You are not waiting for the right time. You are not waiting for the perfect conditions. You are not waiting for someone else to confirm what is possible for you. You are waiting for yourself, for the moment you decide that your current reality is not the final version, for the moment you choose to think bigger, act bolder, and stay longer than most people are willing to. And when you make that decision fully, without hesitation, everything begins to change. Not all at once, but in a way that is real, lasting, and entirely yours.